It was an April evening. I was sitting in a taxi, leaning my elbow against the car door. The trousers were uncomfortable because their pockets were not large enough to hold what I needed today. If you know what I mean. Alexandra, who was also invited to a secret party, was traveling with me. On the morning of the previous day, I received a message from André, in which I was invited to an evening party. The message also had an address attached and said that everything should remain a secret from the ancestors, because if there were incidents with drunken individuals, then there were no complaints against him. As it turned out later, my whole class was invited. Everyone agreed, coming up with different excuses for parents in order to keep the party a secret. The house we were heading to was located a few kilometers from our area, closer to the forest area. As we drove, a picture of a dark forest belt opened up to us, which ominously beckoned us to go inside. Some strange feeling of a coming storm was intoxicating my head. I went only for Alexandra, who was sitting on the phone, pressing the screen with the pads of her fingers, not paying attention to the outside world. Her blonde hair gleamed from the light of the lanterns that swept past the misted windows. I hoped to fulfill my plan towards her. After half an hour of continuous and tiring driving, we were in place. Headlights illuminated the crowd of classmates who were standing in front of the metal gate. In front of them, behind a black and high fence, there was just a huge mansion, old-looking, but decent. We got out of the car, but I, like a real gentleman, paid myself, for which I received words of gratitude from Alexandra. As I approached the gate, I heard many dissatisfied exclamations. The peer invited Andriuka, but he didn't, and the passage was locked. We stood for a minute, tried to dial his number, but the connection was very poor. Suddenly the gates opened with a characteristic rattle. The crowd cheered inside. I was taken aback, stopping at the entrance, looking at a possible mechanism, while my comrades in a barbaric crowd already at the door. I felt the coating. It was somehow rubbery to the touch. It's amazing how compactly the electronic circuit is placed here, I said softly, but aloud. Are you back with your physics? Sasha brought me out of the trance. My interest was replaced by ease. I apologized, straightened my shirt, and we headed inside the mansion. Near the entrance we were met by a long red carpet that led inside, branching into different rooms at the turns, reminding me of the arteries that figuratively passed through the human body in a cycle. Everything looked rich, from the parquet, which was made in an intricate pattern, to the walls, which held stunning pictures of nature. I fell into thought again. I can't help myself, such a person. I like to think about the lofty, estimating the origin or function of an object, its composition. I can stand like this for a very long time if I am not pulled away. Alexandra realized this after 7 years of studying together, so now she grabbed my hand and ran towards the kitchen. I almost fell, but quickly got my bearings. The kitchen was huge, and my classmates were bustling around sorting through the expensive drinks and snacks that André supposedly had laid out on a long ebony table. There was noise. Everyone fussed from side to side, trying to grab as much as possible from the table, the dishes on which seemed endless. I could see the paper on the floor. Picked up. It was inscribed in red, "In vain did Adam eat the forbidden fruit." I sighed sadly as I put the paper back in my pocket. My friend did not stand out from the crowd, said that she would go and take something for us and went to the table. I was not particularly interested in it. I never abused alcohol, but I ate before going out so as not to look impolite. I leaned against the wall and waited. After some time, the mind again left the ordinary world. My attention was drawn to the ceiling. 3 giant crystal chandeliers hung from it, which seemed to glow brighter than the sun, blinding my eyes. But when the blindness faded, my eyes focused on the many wires that hung like snakes from one corner to the other. This technical idea was not executed in the best way. Turned around. Alexandra held cocktails in both hands and walked towards me. She nodded for me to come with her as she walked away. followed her. Moments later we were alone in another distant room. We talked about various things while drinking cocktails that were bitter due to alcohol. I periodically looked at the interior. I was extremely annoyed by the TV, the screen of which reflected the door. It was reminiscent of the presence of a crowd of schoolchildren who at any moment could destroy our romance. Therefore, I tried to look more at my interlocutor. She had a very beautiful face, and it was a natural beauty without countless layers of makeup. He began to compliment her, and she just smiled sweetly. But at one point I had to cut the sheet of romance. As rude as it was, quite loudly I interrupted her voice, which was broadcasting plans for the future with my "shut up" door. The damn door was no longer reflected on the screen. I turned my head frantically. The door moved 15 centimeters to the left. In an instant, I had to grab Alexandra without saying a single word in order to call a taxi and leave this damn place. She complied and we made our way to the door. Either excitement or delight scalded my body with boiling water, burning every nerve ending in the place where the door should have been. There was a wall. I saw my friend's eyes fill with horror. That's where the tears flowed. In seconds, fear smelled not only from the two of us, but also from all those invited, who were convinced of the veracity of our words, looking at the bare wall. Increasingly scary facts hit my head. There were no windows in the house. Some doors had changed their position, blocking the 7 members of our group inside. They could not even be heard, since the walls of the rooms had a noise-suppressing effect, let alone save. The main goal now was to get through to Andre. For he was the cause of our predicament. Many simply sat against the wall, huddled inside their arms. So I took on the role of leader. From the forks and foil we found in the kitchen drawers, I built an application antenna. Communication has spoken. Dial Andrew's number. Horns. He answered the call. I'm on speakerphone. After 5 minutes of explanation, I dropped the phone. From the other end, in a tired voice, they answered me that he had not invited anyone and was now sleeping, because it was already 1 in the morning. This further caused the people here to fall into despair and horror. We were all in danger. So everyone stayed together in the kitchen. I began to ask the sitters about where they were, what they were doing and if they had seen anything strange. They all mumbled something incomprehensible. Horror spread a fog in their heads. However, the haze of incomprehensibility did not last long. There was some noise from the 2nd floor. It was like a scratch. Swearing and doubting for a long time, we gathered a group of 3 people. We went on an expedition to the 2nd floor, which seemed to us infinitely distant. With each step, the light left us. The 2nd floor was abnormally small compared to the 1st. It was extremely narrow here, when, as on the first one, there were more than 10 rooms. Also, it was pitch dark in here. Cautiously, holding each other's hands, like small children, we moved deeper into the depths quietly, like mice. It seemed that the darkness absorbs absolutely all the sounds around, and only the flashlight of the phone prevents this darkness from swallowing us. So we moved on, until around one turn we saw a gray glow. As I got closer, I could see the monitors that were broadcasting every room in the house. Some of them were our comrades, locked up with no hope of rescue. They frantically beat on the walls, all as one. There was also an old voice recorder on the table. I grabbed it and pressed the player button. A hoarse and heavy voice began to broadcast from the speaker. In 5 minutes, the ventilation hatches in your friends' rooms will be blocked, and they will start to slowly suffocate. At that moment, the lights in the room the 3 of them had run into turned on, illuminating the gigantic installation in the corner of the room. To save them, you need to sacrifice one of your comrades. He just needs to stick one hand into the slot first, and after a few minutes the other. Hurry up, finished the voice from the recorder. Vasily, swearing illegibly and feeling irresistible courage in himself, put his hand into the slot of the mechanism. Apparently he thought it was all one big prank. Moments passed that stretched into eternity. There was a crunch of bones. The hydraulic press squeezed Vasily's hand at high speed. She was all broken, exuding not a single river of blood. He screamed in pain as he fell to the floor. There was no talk of continuing the ritual. Vazhia flatly refused to do anything and began to lose consciousness. Alexandra huddled in a corner. She went into hysterics. And only I noticed the recorder that fell out of that ill-fated hole. Alas! You failed my test. Your friends are doomed to death by suffocation. In 5 minutes you will pass out. The alcohol that you drank contained sleeping pills. When you wake up, you will be required to pass the second test, said a voice from the speaker. Eyes slowly began to fall, and consciousness go to the heels. The light was fading away, and the body rushed down. I woke up in a large white room, handcuffed to the wall. At her feet lay a device that looked like a remote control with only 2 buttons. There were all who remained alive, that is, 8 people. My classmates started to wake up one by one. And everyone, as if on cue, began to pull his hand, trying to free himself. It was useless. A few minutes later, a man dressed in a doctor's coat entered the room. He dragged behind him a table on wheels, on which the laptop was located. The maniac's face was hidden behind a mask. In his hands he held a gun. This is the final stage of the game. Now you will be engaged in the most ungrateful thing. You will decide who will live and who will die. Names will appear on the laptop screen. The red button will mean death. Green is life. According to the result of the votes, the sentence will be carried out. Only 2 can survive. The rest will die. The game has begun, the maniac croaked in a metallic voice. First on the list was my name. Out of fear, I fell to the floor. I grabbed this remote and began to press the green button with all my might. I started praying demonstratively to all the gods of the world, just not to be shot in this terrible game. Tears flowed from my eyes like a waterfall. Reluctantly and fearfully, I finally looked up at the monitor. There were 6 green ticks and 2 red ones. Lightness replaced endless fear, and I lay down on the wall exhausted. You idiots! There is only one person left to save. Don't press that damn green button. Jaeger yelled furiously. Applause of indignant voices was heard. Ironically, the next name belonged to Jaeger. I wanted to save Alexandra's life, so I coldly pressed the red button. There are 8 red ticks on the screen. A psychopath with a shotgun came close to Jaeger. He was standing to my right. In the next moment, a shot rang out, deafeningly loud, and the room was painted crimson. Blood splattered on my face. There were screams of horror. Someone just sobbed, someone cried out for help. But still no one could hear. This murderer made soundproofing here too. Alia was next on the list. She was crying uncontrollably because she accidentally pressed the red button on her remote control. Everyone voted for her death. The dwarf in the dressing gown could not kill her with one shot, but he did not want to spend the cartridges, so the classmate was left to die painfully on the floor, choking in her own blood and periodically uttering sobs. Alexandra was next on the list. She reacted coldly to this without saying a word. This added more fuel to the fire of interest in her. As time went on, 3 red and 3 green ticks were displayed on the scoreboard. Fearing that the psychopath would kill her too, I reached out as much as I could to the dead Igor's remote control, grabbed it and pressed the green button. Alexandra was saved. The killer said that there could be no more survivors, and everyone else would be killed. Then the massacre began. Shot after shot, blood splattered here and there, turning everything red. Emotionally, I watched as the murderer killed one after another, cutting off their possibly long and happy lives. The room smelled of death. Finally, the psychopath announced our victory by throwing the keys to the shackles at our feet, and he himself retired, leaving bloody footprints in his wake. I freed myself, but I was in no hurry to free my friend. The killer again returned to the room, this time with a can of gasoline. He poured it around the room. An evil grin spread across my face. The robed figure removed his mask. It was André. Few people knew that we were brothers. Few people knew that Alexandra's father shot our father 2 years ago. Few people knew that this mansion was inherited by us. We wished to make a bloody vendetta. My task was to make sure that Alexandra would arrive at her destination and that no one would manage to get out of here, while André monitored the serviceability of all the mechanisms that we had built during the long 2 years of preparation. The rest were invited so as not to arouse Alexandra's suspicions. Your father is a killer. Your death will be his greatest punishment. Game over, I said ominously, putting the revolver to Alexandra's forehead, which bothered me so much while I was riding in a taxi.